what Regina wanted me to pass along to you is that Planet Labs is going to, well, is looking to make available data for the Arctic and the boreal region. And when I say looking to, this is a proposal because there's a similar set of data that's been made available for tropical forest monitoring, and the Norwegian government has supported that with funding. And so it's not entirely free. It needs a government or some kind of a sponsor to help out. But nonetheless, when that sponsor is found, then there's possibility of sharing very high resolution data with the research community. So Planet's mission is to make the whole world everyday imaged, making change visible, accessible, and actionable. And so this is the constellation of satellites that they have. Again, as you can see, I've seen an example of the SkySat satellite. So it's very, very small compared to the other more government-sponsored ones. And so you can see here, the Super Dove, for example, is 180 of these satellites, and the resolution is 3.9 meters. The orbit altitude is 465 kilometers. And when they resample the pixels, it gets down to 3.125 meters. The spectral bands are blue, green, red, red edge, and near infrared. And coupled with the fact that we've been talking with Planet about making this kind of data available, because GEO, as you know, works essentially with governments. That's how it got started. Governments interested in sharing data from their national programs. So, you know, NASA and JAXA from Japan and so forth. And yet publicly funded satellite information is typically about the best resolution is from the Sentinels now from the European Commission, and that's about 10 meters. So if you want really high resolution data, then you need to go to the private sector to get that. But in any case, the whole reason that GEO exists is that we are trying to realize societal benefits that can come through Earth observations, which are fully shared along with the information and knowledge products and services that stem from those Earth observations. And so the Arctic is recognized as a global common good. I mean, we've been talking quite a bit about that. And the best way to increase the knowledge and support decisions and actions for the Arctic is to have an open data policy. So what does that mean? Well, this is the example of a program that's called NICF that Planet has been involved in with the Norwegian government. So NICF is the Norway's International Climate and Forest Initiative. Planet provides this initiative with high resolution monitoring of global tropics to bring unprecedented data, transparency, global climate and conservation efforts. There's a lot of, as you can see here, 10,000 registered users representing 132 countries. And they are using this data to produce monthly base maps of tropical forest data. The impacts is, you can see, are considerable. You know, I don't need to go through all of these, but nonetheless, the point here is that when you make the data openly available, thanks to the Norwegian government, then the uptake is pretty tremendous. Here's an example of the Central African Forest Initiative that looks at deforestation and degradation that brought together 6 Congo Basin countries with additional donors, and they were trying to work on a way to detect deforestation happening in Central Africa. And so thanks to this, the NICF data that's been made available, they were able to do this. Then also deforestation and change estimation was also developed in Mozambique. And if you take a look at on the let's see, on the left hand side, you see the areas that are deforested in red. The green is forest, and the clear areas are non-forest. And on the right, you have sentinel-based estimations. But when you combine that with the high resolution data from Planet, you can get a much better grasp on how things are changing. And then there's another way, this is just another approach to doing land and forest degradation, deforestation. This is using a Google Earth engine. So this type of data can be used on several platforms like Amazon, Google Earth Engine, and Microsoft. And the reason that I'm bringing this to your attention is that, again, the offer here, or the proposal, is to provide up to almost near daily high resolution monitoring of the Arctic between 60 and 80 degrees north to the global community, similar to the NICF program for tropical rainforests. And here are some types of projected use cases that could be realized with this data. Again, 3 to 4 meters per pixel for the Arctic and boreal zones. It would be suitable for permafrost monitoring, monitoring human activities, boreal forest monitoring, assessing Arctic and boreal vegetation, freshwater monitoring, ship traffic, wildfire and disaster response, supporting indigenous communities with, and here, with near daily status information and adapting their lifestyles to drastically changing conditions, peatland monitoring, land and sea ice monitoring, habitats in protected areas, and also assessing large mammal populations. So the applications of this kind of data are quite vast. One thing that Regina specified to me, and that is that this data is available up to, I think she said up to 15 kilometers from a coastline. So it's not like it's over, over open sea but this is what I'm not quite sure of. She said that, but at the same time, I think you can, sea ice monitoring is something that's also, it's mentioned here, land and sea ice monitoring. So I don't quite understand that, but she said that there's, in cases, I guess, where there's open water, that's what it is, where there's open water, then data is provided up to 15 kilometers from the coastline. Otherwise, if it's sea ice, then they can be detected. Okay, so here's an example of how an oil spill in the Arctic is monitored. You can see on the left, the dark brown diesel fuel that is leaking through the mains of the water pathways, and then you can see how disaster response teams install booms in the middle picture. But drifting ice broke the booms and the spill reached a lake, Iyasino, threatening to reach the Arctic Ocean. And then on June 13th, the containers were placed along the river for collecting contaminated water. So you can see that that's very high resolution to see those kinds of details. Also, Planet Scope is, I believe this is an archive of data that they were also going to make available that goes back about 9 years in the past. And so it would be a good data series, good data source to use for time series analysis and things. Okay, so that's just one thing that I wanted to talk about and bring to the attention of our group here. And I hope that we can maybe make a note of it somehow in the proceedings of the working group, so that this, again, the support, governmental support is being worked out right now. Perhaps the European Commission will be interested in supporting this, but if it comes to fruition, then there's a whole host of really high resolution data that is available to the Arctic community. How could that be used? Well, this is the second part of my talk here. So let me go back again to, let's see, it's not the right one.
clarify? So
Yeah.
it's basically this data set exists, but it's not open to the public until there's funding for it. So
That's
that's
correct.
the, okay,
That's correct. And I mean, and it's being built up daily.
sure.
So you can purchase it?
You could purchase it, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can. But the objective here, I guess, is to make it available for free.
Yeah.
You know, if there's a government support for it. Now let's see here. I'll just share.
Do you record, like, once it's open to the public, do you still have a way of capturing who is accessing it and for what purpose?
Yes, I for sure they keep a register of who's accessing it, and at least the NICF program they do. I don't know about this particular one, but I would assume it's going to be the same.
Do you have a sense of sort of the broad percentages of each group that have been accessing the NICF data? Is it mainly governments or private sector organizations?
I believe, well, NICF, like this program, is targeted at the research community. So it's not for commercial use. It would
It's
be,
not.
no, it's not. So it would be for research for government.
Even though it's free to use, it's still targeted at research, not.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
But the private sector would have access to it as well, even because it's free, right?
I guess this is where I'm sure they keep tabs on who's accessing it.
I mean, maybe you have to make a request.
You have to make a request.
I see.
I don't know how the NICF platform works, but I think you have to register, and you have to say you represent the government or what you represent, and then there's a kind of a portal there that allows you in if you are.
So it's kind of similar to how you can get data from Art Council or Winwin.
Yeah.
You can, some of it is just right there, and other data you can request it if you're Art Council country or an observer, and then they start to implement a paywall.
Yeah.
And then some of it you probably can't ever get.
There's also another platform called CPAL. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's in the CPAL is a platform that is a forest data analytics platform that's supported by several countries, by Brazil, by Norway. It's SEPAL, and NICF data is on that platform. So if you are from a government or from a research institute, you can go to CPAL and register and use that computing environment to make use of NICF data. So I imagine something similar would be set up for the Arctic and Boreal data, but it depends on how who's funding or who's supporting it. So I just briefly want to talk about something else. GEO has for a long time been trying to position itself vis-a-vis the private sector, and not quite certain how to make that relationship go forward. About 3 years ago, we started a series of what we call cloud credit programs with Amazon Web Services, with Google Earth Engine, and with Microsoft. And I just briefly I'm going to talk about these. The first, the idea here is that what does a public-private partnership look like, especially with GEO being intergovernmental? It's really it's public, but it's also intergovernmental, and there was some concerns on the part of the government's members in GEO on interfacing with the private sector. So but yet we also have been mandated to do that, we being the GEO Secretariat. So what we thought about doing was working first with Amazon Web Services to see if they would be willing to provide credits to use their computing environment, their cloud computing environment, for projects that will make use of Earth observation data that they have on storage. So they have Landsat data, they have Sentinel data, they're in the process of getting NICF data. And the idea is that there are several ideas here. One is that this is the future. Satellite data is just terabytes and terabytes, and you can't download it anymore. The idea of you downloading data to computer and analyzing it is finished, because you can't, it's just too much. So cloud services, cloud storage can do that much more efficiently. And so what needs to happen now is that the analytical part of developing applications on Earth observations has to move to the cloud as well. And so with Amazon, what we negotiated was that they would give up to $60,000 worth of credits for a single country project, or $100,000 of credits for a multiple country project that makes use of their web services and the data that's on it. And then we also had some help with another small SME called Synergize, located, I believe, in Slovenia, that has developed something called Sentinel Hub, which facilitates access to Sentinel data. So how do we, okay, so they're willing to give us these credits. Now what do you do? So we thought, well, we'll do a call for proposals. How would the community out there use this data? What kinds of projects would they use it for? The only criteria that we set was that a developing country needed to be involved, so that there'd be some capacity development that goes on, or capacity sharing. The duration of the project would be 3 years, and there needed to be some tangible application that comes out of it at the end of it. It all needs to be done in open as open source. So we received 26 proposals, and we went through a review process and ended up funding quote unquote with the credits 20 proposals. And this was launched in July of 2019, and we're coming up on 3 years this summer, at which point the projects are expected to terminate and show us, demonstrate their projects and so forth. So that's one way that we've been doing things. Another way is with Google Earth Engine, where Google Earth has come to GEO and said, okay, we'll give you quote unquote all you can eat licenses to use Google Earth Engine over a 2-year period. And they provided technical support, which was something that is a great bonus, especially with developing countries who are trying to learn how to use this technology. Here, in this case, we received 52 proposals, and we're able to go forward with about 30 of them. That we go through a review process again, where we kind of look at the scientific merits and what do they want to do? Do they know what they're doing? Do they have a sufficient? Do they make sufficient and justifiable use of the computing environment and so forth? And lately we've been working with Microsoft, and Microsoft has even gone a step further, and they provide actual funding. So they provided up to $500,000 in cloud credits to use their Azure environment, and $500,000 to spend on 1-year projects. And the maximum is $60,000, both in credits and in funding for each project. And we've done this 3 times, in May, September, and November. We've issued calls for proposals, and we've gotten, all proposals put together. We've had over 100 received. We've been able to fund about with $500,000 and same amount in cash, we're able to fund about anywhere from 7 to 9 proposals per call. So again, the criteria here is that there be tangible data products and cloud-based workflows that demonstrate how the Microsoft's planetary computer will support policy and monitoring for local decision makers and management. And then we also went a step further to ask them that the deliverables be scalable that they produce. So again, if it's open science, open source, that we'd be able to include it in our knowledge hub and then scale it up. So here is one project that was submitted in response to the call for Google Earth Engine, and that is ice shelf monitoring in Antarctica. And I don't recall the details offhand now, but they are developing an application that will allow ice sheet motion to be detected based on I don't know exactly which data set they're using in Google Earth Engine, but their Google Earth Engine has the same as Landsat's got Sentinel data and so forth. And so they're developing an application that will permit this to happen. And that's something that, so I'm presenting this because thinking that Planet now is getting ready to give us data, and we've got these three partners. I think we're primed to be able to do some very interesting projects in the Arctic and boreal zones. So why do this? Well, the point is that the zero download model, which as I mentioned earlier, is kind of the wave of the future now. We're trying to lower the barriers for people to use data and analytic environments. Data users can analyze massive amounts of data in minutes now, no matter where they are in the world. Having a common set of data to work from brings consistency to results, and then it promotes collaboration and so forth. And we had, under the Amazon Web Service, we had a couple of projects from the Ukraine, and we've not heard from them in the last few months, not surprisingly. So we don't know what they're doing, but one of the projects was looking at illegal amber mining, using Sentinel data to monitor illegal amber mining. And that's quite interesting. So anyway, I think that's my last slide. Hope that's understandable.
No, that was great. And actually, I think that last example that you just gave about the amber mining is a perfect example of a societal benefit, right?
Yeah.
Like 100%. And I was thinking about it too with the forestry examples, the deforestation examples. And I don't know, I mean, there's that big paper that came out last week or the week before about the deforestation in Brazil. And I was wondering if some of that data is coming.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. There's Brazil has on several of these programs, they have submitted projects that are making use of vast amounts of satellite data in what's called a data cube. I don't know if you've heard of data cubes, but it's a way of aligning as you go through time. You get satellite imagery and you align them so that all the pixels are aligned, and so you can choose a select number of pixels and do time series analysis as you go back in time. And that's Brazil is working on a couple of projects to monitor deforestation and also land degradation.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. So just to open it up for questions, discussion.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Go right ahead.
Okay. It's maybe not really well formed in my head. I think my question is, it was a really interesting presentation with there's a lot there and a lot of capabilities. And thinking just so this group is focused on societal benefit areas or frameworks for the concept in general. So I think my question is, how do you take these capabilities which have sort of, limitless applications and make sure that they're being used in a way that, is of societal benefit. And then could you maybe speak to, of the projects that are being worked on now, are there a few ways, a few main types of societal benefits that seem to be rising to the front or seem to be best addressed by these kind of tools?
Yeah, that's a very good question. As we've gone along with these programs, we've refined the target of what we would like to see happen, the outcome, if you will. When we first started with Amazon, the objective there was to really encourage developing countries to make use of this technology. So that was kind of the societal benefit, was just in a capacity, development kind of role. But then we've thought, well, we have a GEO work program that's got a number of activities happening in it, such as GEO Bond, the Biodiversity Observation Network, which is supporting the CBD, the conventional biological diversity, and the development of essential biodiversity variables, and things of that nature. So we thought, well, why not take this firepower that we have and support what's actually in our work program. So activities of the work program are targeting societal benefits. So that's how the link is made. So that the stipulation now, whenever we launch one of these programs, is they being the proposal writers, they need to target an activity of the GEO work program and say specifically how they're going to help that program. And we take their proposal and give it to the leadership of that program and say, is this valid? Is there something that's meaningful that's going to come out of this work? And you know, 9 times out of 10, the answer is yes. Occasionally it's no, this has been done before, or no, this is not really relevant to the work that we're doing. So then, you know, obviously those proposals don't go forward. But that I think is the way to ensure that there's a societal benefit. We rely on what's being contributed to the work program by the members and government members and participating organizations in GEO for societal benefit, and then we ask the proposals to support that.
Okay,
Yeah.
that makes a lot of sense. So I'm on the GEO website, I think. So those are the Sustainable Development Goals, climate
Right.
action, and
Right.
disaster risk reduction. So it would have to fall into one of those ones.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
great, thank you.
So,
Yes, I was asked about, but I know that these big companies, they tend to govern the whole market, so they want actually to get bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
And what do you do, for example, thinking in long term, so how can you like try to make GEO or governments independent of this kind of tools that are now taking over everything?
Yeah. Well, that's why it's not been easy to identify what it means for GEO to work with the private sector. It's taken a long time to get to this point, but with the private sector, as we heard this morning, the private sector is not a philanthropic thing. They expect a return on their investment. And so if we can find a way to make it win-win, an application gets developed that, of course, it goes into Microsoft's planetary computer as something that others can use if they pay for it. But at the same time, we've negotiated with them that it's going to be available openly too for others to use outside. They don't necessarily have to do, go through the planetary computer. They can take what's been done and apply it somewhere else. So it's, it's both sides come out ahead, and that's what we're trying to aim for in our partnerships with the private sector.
so Herman, you have a question in the chat. Do you want to ask it? Might have Doug read it, me read it.
Okay, he's asking about Maxar, formerly Digital Globe. That's an interesting question. I'm not sure what's happening. So I guess the short answer, Herman, is Digital Globe, to my knowledge, has not been a part of this, but maybe it's something that I should try and follow up with. Thanks for pointing that out.
Okay, any other comments or questions? So we have about 7 minutes. The clock just ticked over. I'm just wondering if we shouldn't maybe try and distill a few key points from our discussion, because this has been a really interesting couple of presentations, but I don't have the agenda up. What is on the agenda now? General discussion?
Yep.
Yeah, so I'm thinking if we could distill a couple of key points from the presentations and the discussion that we've had, and then, you know, we can work on turning those into recommendations. That would be great. And so Talia and Mary and I will try and capture them. So I'm just gonna open it up. I mean, I can start. I think that at a very high level, I think one of the takeaways, and it's something that we've always known, but we haven't really had the opportunity to explore it in detail here, is the partnership, the potential of partnering with the private sector to fill in gaps, in information gaps and data gaps, and also the potential for private sector data to be used much more broadly than it is by a whole wide variety of individuals. And I'm thinking, because we're going to have to come up with some kind of summary statement, but we'll also do a report from this meeting. And I think maybe providing the examples that you've given us and Pooja has given us is in and a pathway or recommendations for how to go about that would be great. Ravi and I were having a little discussion, well, about FUGRO, and then about the work that GEO has been doing with Google and everything. And, you know, in Canada, we've tried to put together a national collaborative data, the CCADI, right? And we've been sort of batting around the idea within CCADI about turning that into a standalone entity, like pulling it out of the academic world because it's so complicated to continue to run a consortium like that through multiple universities and things. So anyway, that was 2 or 3 thoughts rolled up in one, but I think that demonstrating the significance of being able to do work with the private sector is really important.
Yeah. Okay, there's something in the chat here.
Yeah, Ravi says. Some key takeaways are that there are multiple benefits of the open science approach with regards to promoting collaboration and enabling a greater, broader uptake for use.
Yeah. And I think another point is that working with the private sector, we have to recognize that it's not philanthropy. Okay, so that they will be looking for some kind of a return on their investment, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, or you know, bad thing from the, I guess, the idealistic scientific world. It can be a very good thing, and what the private sector brings is a lot of resources, a lot of you know, this is what they do, and it can be done more efficiently, I think, than many times we can do in the academic world. That, you know, things such as data analytic platforms, you know, they do that. These 3 companies that I've mentioned do that very well. So we shouldn't be squeamish about working with the private sector. We just need to find something that illustrates the benefits on both sides, and you know, make sure it's well defined, and know what to expect, and I think it can be a very good experience.
So there's a comment from Lucy in the chat. This is why I'd like to see the connection. Ooh, the chat's moving around with emissions clearer, because they will be working towards a net zero target and may find another way. Yes, it's an excellent point. And then Herman says, and the academic world also expects return on investment of time and effort in research, being published, getting a degree, all of that sort of thing. And it is true, but I mean, Harry and I just had an experience with our home institution where Harry got some money from the territorial government to work with students on turning one of the vehicles we have at the research station to electrify it, as an example of what could be done in sort of a joint government academic research project. And the first thing the university did was make it really complicated for us to get the money, right? and so we have another avenue for making that happen. So that's what we did. But that's, I think, what you find. I know that I know that many university departments have very close working relationships with the private sector, but I feel like on most of the Arctic science community outside of the remote sensing community does not have that experience the way, say, like the medical schools do, or those kinds of things. And so we kind of go, like what?
Research stations do.
Yeah, research stations do.
Yeah, I think research stations more and more are forming partnerships with private sector companies, because the research station is perhaps a little bit more nimble than a larger institution like a university, and more often than not, the research station is in the location that the private sector company is interested in, rather than it being maybe a southern university with a northern research station. It's better to work straight with the northern research station than with a southern institution. But
Yeah.
This is just a question with regard, like, talking about return on investment. I think it's a genuine question. I'm not trying to like negate that, but are there going to be risks associated with that as well? Risk, I think Hazel kind of touched on it, but like return on investment doesn't have to be financial, visibility, learning, but especially if we're talking about like partnering with an academic institution, there could be like ethical implications associated with that.
Yeah, and I think this is, I mean, I don't mean to jump in here, but I will. This is what has been probably a big sticking point in the GEO community, is this question of, okay, you get a grant of $60,000 worth of credits with Amazon Web Services. You need to set up an account. You need to give them a credit card. You need to give them a certain amount of private information, even though it's understood that you're not going to be charged until you go over the 60,000. So what happens to your private data? And in Europe, I think there's a lot more concern about that than there has been in North America. And that is indeed an issue that I don't necessarily have an answer for that. I guess it's what level are you comfortable with? Each of these, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, they have data protection policies in place, but we all know those can be breached. So, but that's just about the way it goes with anything nowadays. So yeah, ethics. And I was just thinking, what we've heard from the indigenous communities too is they probably would be very reluctant to work closely with the private sector. I mean, I don't know. It'd be interesting to hear what they might think about this kind of a setup. I just sense that there's, we've talked about establishing a trust relationship, and that's essentially between the communities and the research, academia. But what about with the private sector? How's that?
Yeah, and I'd say the average scientist, with some exceptions, hasn't really worked that out. So we just have like no minutes left, but I wanted to call on Lucy because I think she had a comment that maybe I didn't quite capture correctly.
Thank you. Yeah, I just think it's really important to see that whole line, that if they are more aware of the value of the observations made and can see how that can help with achieving their net zero target. So most people will be starting to beat the pathway to net zero one way or another. But if they're able to, I'm mixing up my questions and my wish list. And so I would love a science journal to have something like the abstract, something else that makes it clearer for the policymaker or the layperson to just know a little bit more about you, to make you more accessible. And how you do that so that you restrict the data and achieve your goals, I don't know. But for people to be able to understand a little bit closer what's happening, the layperson, the policy person, and maybe they get down into that paper or access that paper to read it, but just to know there's a lever there that they can relate to. And also for that private sector to see that if they indulge in your work and participate in whatever it is that you want, that they're going to help achieve their net zero target. And I can see that link, but I think for me personally, when I'm trying to persuade individuals at all different levels to get interested in the risks, we have to talk about adaptation and we have to talk about mitigation, and we can't lose one of those three. And so to do that, it's really important for them to feel that they can access and understand a part of it. So I really think it's important that we're talking more about the emissions for the rest of the community, the rest of the global community that are making the problems so bad. Hopefully something's clear in there.